It's 1953, winter is coming to an end. On February 28th, Joseph Vissarionovich is sitting at his near dacha in Kuntsevo, Moscow. It was called near because Stalin had more than 20 dachas all over the country. That one situated close to Kremlin, only 15 minutes drive. The leader of USSR was terrified for his life, so all the dachas were painted green for the camouflage. Since the ruler of the world proletariat had lived alone for the last 15 years, he needed to entertain himself somehow. First, he watched the film in the cinema. Incidentally, it's difficult to say which film Joseph Vissarionovich was watching. We can only guess. Stalin's favorite film was Chipaev, a film about a brave cavalry brigade commander who heroically died in the Russian Civil War. Between 1934 and 1936, the leader of USSR watched this film at least 38 times, so we can imagine that Stalin was watching Chipaev that evening. After the film, a small feast ensued. For this purpose, that same evening, members of the USSR Presidium Council were summoned to a get-together. Georgy Malenkov, Stalin's deputy as General Secretary of the Central Committee of All Union Communist Party, Lavrentiy Beria, recently relieved of his post as People's Commissar of Internal Affairs, but still an extremely influential figure, Nikolai Bulganin, first deputy chairman of the USSR Council of Ministers, and last but not least, Nikita Khrushchev, secretary of the Central Committee, who handled the Presidium's day-to-day affairs and organized its work. All the people listed above arrived at Stalin's party by 12 a.m. It should be noted right away that Joseph Vissarionovich didn't like to get drunk. He drank moderately, mixing alcohol with water, and never reached the point of drunkenness, but he loved to get others drunk. On the night of February 28th to March 1st, we had a menu, Magyari grape juice. This is a young grape wine, but the master called it juice because of its low alcohol content. And so that night the master called me and said, "Give us 2 bottles of juice." Who was there that night? His usual guests, Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev and Bulganin. After a while he called again, "Bring more juice." Well, they brought it and served it. All was quiet, no complaints, writes one of the Dacha's security guards, Pyotr Lozgachev. An important detail of any Stalinist feast was that everyone had a role to play. Nikita Khrushchev was supposed to dance the hopak and tell jokes. Nikolai Bulganin was assigned a Russian dance and a cake number. Someone would place the cake on his chair and Bulganin would unnoticingly sit down on it. Immediately afterwards, Nikolai would go change into a second pair of pants, brought from home in advance. Mikoyan and Beria were the leading wine experts. Stalin told them, "You Caucasians know a thing or two about this," and he'd never even drank a sip before them. Mikoyan and Beria opened all the wines and tasted them themselves. Mikoyan later explained why. Beria was in charge of NKVD and I was in charge of the food industry. That meant we had access to these wines. Around 5 a.m. on March the 1st, the guests began to leave, so Stalin went to bed in high spirit, and then the interesting part began. Iosif Vissarionovich wasn't a morning person. Stalin usually rose around 10 or 11 a.m. and began work after breakfast. On March the 1st, the first problem arose. The leader hadn't woken up for dinner, and no lights were on. Why not go and check on him? This was strictly forbidden to everyone except one person. An hour, 2, 3 passed, but nothing changed. The Dacha security guards, led by Pyotr Lozgachev, began to grow increasingly nervous. The situation only subsided around 10 p.m. when the mail arrived. It's worth noting that the only person allowed to enter at any time was the postman. This function was performed by Dacha security guards. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Lozgachev entered Stalin's quarters with a package from the Central Committee. Stalin was lying on the floor near the table. He was wearing pajama pants, already wet from involuntary urination, and an undershirt. What was certain was that he had been lying there for several hours and was very cold. A bottle of Borjomi mineral water stood on the table. Apparently Stalin, around 6 or 7 p.m., got out of the bed and went into the dining room for a drink of water. That's when the stroke occurred. Lozgachev called for help over the intercom. Starostin, Tukov and Butusova came running. The four of them carried Stalin to another room, the so-called Great Hall, where they laid him on the sofa and covered him with a blanket. Stalin was paralyzed and unresponsive, although his eyes were open, as Lozgachev believed it was visible to a naked eye. The guards decide to call Beria and Malenkov and are ordered by them not to tell anyone about what happened. The guards at Stalin's estate, namely Lozgachev, begin calling members of the Presidium of the Central Committee, especially Malenkov, asking them to come and sort out the situation, perhaps to call doctors. First, Khrushchev and Bulganin arrive. Then, after their departure, Beria and Malenkov. Both Beria and Khrushchev apparently decided at that moment that there was nothing to fear. The leader had simply overindulged and embarrassed himself, and was now lying down and resting. However, the worried servants and guards continued to worry. Closer to morning, Starostin began calling Malenkov again. Ultimately, the doctors arrived at Stalin's place at least 15 hours after the stroke. Malenkov called Health Minister Tretyakov, who sent a team of the best, or rather the best available at the time, doctors to the dacha led by Lukomsky, the Minister of Health's chief physician. They arrived in Kuntsevo around 9 a.m. After an examination, Stalin was found to have very high blood pressure and complete paralysis on the right side of his body. Only his left arm had some movement, as well as speechlessness. The diagnosis was clear: a stroke. At this point, Stalin's inner circle took complete control of the still living leader's body. Right there on the sofa, it was decided that members of the inner circle would keep vigil at Stalin's bedside in pairs, taking turns every few hours. In the evening, the members of Presidium met in the Kremlin and held 2 sessions without a transcript, possibly agreeing on further actions in the event of Stalin's death. Koba's condition remains unchanged. Doctors assure his inner circle that Stalin is unlikely to survive more than a few days. At this point, it becomes clear to everyone that a power struggle is brewing. Khrushchev begins plotting against Beria, considering him the most dangerous member of the Presidium. And what about ordinary people? According to Lev Razgon, who was imprisoned in Stalin's camp, there was an incredibly long pause in the radio broadcast that day, followed by only classical morning music, the kind that could only be played on the occasion of the death of the government leader. Razgon already guessed that this might be Stalin's possible death. Soviet citizens are finally informed of the General Secretary's illness. Newspapers and radio reports on his health condition. Meanwhile, Stalin is getting worse. Doctors are losing hope even for a miracle. The country begins to prepare for the General Secretary's death. The health bulletins, broadcast regularly on the radio every few hours, make no secret of the leaders of the people's virtually hopeless situation. The inner circle continues to keep vigil in pairs at Stalin's bedside, simultaneously plotting the contours of future alliances. On this day, a joint meeting of the Central Committee, the USSR Council of Ministers, and the Presidium of the Supreme Soviets of the USSR took place, beginning at 8 p.m. The entire event lasted 40 minutes. After the meeting, some of its participants immediately went to Stalin's dacha. That same day, Stalin experienced bloody vomiting. Stalin died at 9:50 p.m. The exact time of death was recorded by Dr. Мясников. At the moment of death, according to eyewitnesses, Stalin raised his left hand and index finger, trying to make some kind of gesture, but at that very moment his breathing stopped. According to Svetlana Alliluyeva, Beria immediately ran into the corridor after the leader's death and exclaimed, "Hrustalev, a car." Other inner circle members soon followed Beria to confirm the decisions made at the national leadership meeting and assume their duties in the new government. Stalin's death was announced on the radio at 6 a.m. According to the medical report, death was caused by cerebral hemorrhage. From March 6 to 9, the Soviet people bid farewell to Stalin, and a national day of mourning was declared. The coffin containing the deceased body was placed in the House of Unions. Stalin's funeral took place on March 9. The autopsy report on Stalin's body was kept for a long time in the Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History, later declassified and published in early 2013. In official documents, Joseph Stalin was referred to as patient number 1. It was noted that on March 1st, 1953, at 6:30 p.m., Stalin suffered a cerebral hemorrhage due to hypertension and atherosclerosis. And on the evening of the March 5th, he died due to growing cardiovascular and respiratory failure. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you like it. Subscribe for more content to come. And also, if you have questions, I will have a pinned comment about the poisoning, about the doctors. So, thank you. See you next time.